have any reactions to whether it makes sense to revisit any of this or whether you like them the way that they are. So with that, let me open it up and see if anybody's got any questions or any suggestions they'd like to make.
Well, I do. Operating principle number 8, under accountability, we will conduct open, transparent, and frequent communications with the community. I agree in that wholeheartedly. That being said, if we go back to operating principle 2, open communication, fourth bullet, information required by statute to be discussed in closed session and so discussed will remain confidential. This is a copy of the Illinois Open Meetings Act, and the Open Meetings Act does not stipulate that closed sessions be held. There are options to hold them, and they give exclusions with which you can conduct it, and if you're going to go into closed session, you have to cite that specific entity that you go into closed session for. I think that going into closed sessions, however, leaves a lot of mystery to some of the topics that are discussed, and some of these topics perhaps don't need to be discussed in closed session, some do. What I don't like is when you come out of closed session, you pass a motion and you don't infer as to what was discussed, or at least some background to some of the thought process. And I think it's important for folks in the community to realize that closed session provides a forum for open discussion and communication. It's not like we're trying to hide anything from anybody. So I think the whole concept of what closed session implies can lead to misunderstanding. And I think that really needs to be clarified. And when you come out, certainly we don't have to detail everything that was stated, but I certainly think that, you know, a interrogatory, or I don't know if that's the right word, but a discussion of, we considered these topics, these points, and that's what we were doing in closed session. And it takes away that veil of mystery. And I think that would be very helpful to a lot of folks in the community.
So let me understand, Tony, you're not objecting necessarily to the operating principles per se. What you're saying is perhaps we can clarify when we come out of closed session more specifically.
I would like to clarify, but that fourth bullet is not worded properly. Information required by statute to be discussed. There's nothing required by statute to be discussed.
How about information allowed by statute?
Well,
yes, it is allowed.
Let me identify a couple of issues here, because this discussion has come up in prior board retreats as well. The key verb in here is required. And I think you're right to point out that the Open Meetings Act doesn't require anything to be held in closed session. So there are kind of three issues that I think are raised. One, although the Open Meetings Act does not require anything to be discussed in closed session, I don't have enough of command of all of the other school codes and personnel-related statutes to know whether any of them require anything to be held in closed session. And so, you know, I think as an operating principle, if there is information that is required to be discussed in closed session, you know, at least previous boards have taken the position that we should honor that confidentiality. So, for instance, if we're discussing, you know, if we're discussing a student discipline case, you know, that kind of thing, you know, the information exchange should stay confidential. Now, the second issue that relates to that relates to the broader category of things that the Open Meetings Act allows to be discussed in closed session, but does not require. So a good example of that might be our negotiating strategy for the upcoming teacher contract negotiation. We could, if we so choose, set our strategy and our bottom line in an open forum. Most practitioners of negotiations will tell you that that is not a good idea because the other side of the bargaining table is listening to you when you do that. So, you know, there's, I think, something worth the board talking about as to how we feel about our obligation to keep confidential. And this would be an ethical obligation, not a legal obligation, to keep confidential things that, you know, the board has decided should be done in closed session. And then maybe the third issue, and this is a new one that I don't think we've discussed before, is the one you kind of raised at the end, and that is even when we properly discuss something in closed session, maybe it makes sense to do more of a fulsome summary of that for the public before we adopt something. And that idea is particularly well taken, I think. So, you know, there are kind of three things out there. I guess what I'd suggest on the first one is either leave the bullet the way it is and kind of bracket the question of whether that applies often, seldom, or even at all. Or the other thing we could do is we could ask counsel, you know, are there any things in that box?
But I'd be perfectly happy if you put information that may be required, and that could incorporate any other statute outside of the open meeting. That, I'd be perfectly happy with that. I'm happy to see what you would like to find in that point, because I think that's going to be a benefit to a lot of folks.
Maybe the thing to also consider, Tony, is in the, we were just talking about the measures. Yeah, the measures, that could be something that we could add to the report, you know, to support transparency. You know?
I would like to read the council's opinion, because I think we are obligated in certain cases to preserve privacy to employees and students. And there's no way, there's certain things, there's no way we can discuss in open meeting. So, you know, maybe this is badly worded, but I think there are probably statutory things that tell us when we need to have discussions about certain things.
And it may be worth our refreshing, you know, our education on which of those things are actually required as opposed to merely standard practice.
We cite several sources other than the statute. I think there might be something that the REA would do in the school that might also require confidential
Right.
discipline or compensation.
Right, so statute may, you know, it may be statute, it might be case law, it might be contract that requires this. But, you know, I think if the board agrees, it may be worth asking our council to kind of give us a cheat sheet for, you know, or a short list of those things that go beyond standard practice or go beyond the holiday.
I think that should be public, so people are aware of that.
Yes. Any other, ask for the board comments on them, and I'll get to the public ones. Any other board comments on the operating principles? Come on up.
Well, we have a chance to see the school board's legal opinion on IOMA, because I think IOMA has such a strong policy statement behind it from the Illinois legislature. I don't think that anything trumps IOMA. I think that it says what it says. I've read the act in detail and all the annotations, and I think what you need to decide as a board is where there's discretion, whether you go into closed session or you keep it open, where are you on a board? Are you going to go to closed session whenever you can, or are you going to discuss it in front of the public? So I think you just need to decide what kind of board you're going to be, because there is discretion there. It does say may. I think the IOMA, you know, act is pretty clear, and I believe one of you should be a trained compliance person on IOMA, right? Who is that? They
We
should.
have, well, actually, I think 3 of us are.
Yeah, so
know.
you should have a pretty good idea of what that says, right?
Well, but let me stop you, because I think, and let me preface this with, this is not the area of law that I practice, you know, in my private practice, and that's partly why I want to hear what counsel has to say about it. But the notion, the issue that I want to get an opinion on in particular is that IOMA is not the only statute in Illinois. You know, there are other statutes, some of which will govern the privacy of information. And so, for instance, the case that is on my mind in particular are student discipline cases,
Right.
which we conduct in closed session. IOMA certainly doesn't say we have to do student discipline cases in closed session, but it wouldn't surprise me if there's another piece of federal law or state law that says we do.
Right.
And that's what I'm looking for. I'm not sure that there is going to be a list of things that we must discuss in closed session, but I'm worried that there is. And so that's why I'd like to get the council.
Right. And I think what Mr. Barone Borelli is saying, and forgive me if I'm putting words in your mouth, but what he's saying is, of course there are certain things that need to be kept private. And of course you need to do everything that the law demands. But in the situations where it could go either way, I think it's always better to shine sunlight on the process. You know, it's in your board goals, and I think, you know, that there is some suspicion, and we do want to apply greater scrutiny when we don't know what's going on, and then there's something in the minutes that doesn't even say what was discussed. So, you know, that's the shroud of secrecy that I think gives worry, and you can strengthen the trust and relationship and strengthen this body if there is more, you know, openness. So I think we just have to be really careful about using that closed session in an abusive way when it's not necessary. So I guess that's the only point I'm making, because as I've just becoming familiar with the board, that's one of the challenges I've had. I can read the documents all day long, but I don't know what was discussed or why, or even why you went into session. So that's very confusing. I think that's one of the most difficult things I've had understanding in learning through this process. So I appreciate Mr. Borelli's comments.
I just want to add one thing. The why component of when we went into closed session, in my opinion, I think John has done an adequate job summarizing when we go into a closed session, why we're going. If the community is not understanding it, that's a different story. Perhaps we can work on methods to better educate the community when we do go into closed session, why we're going, without talking about the specifics of talking about.
Yeah, and I think Dr. Borelli makes a good point that we should at least be asking ourselves of, have we been as clear as possible, or have we been, for instance, using boilerplate statutory language to go into closed session, which doesn't tell us a lot. And I think that's worth thinking. For what it's worth, I would say I don't think this board abuses the ability to go into closed session. I don't think that we reflexively go into closed session whenever the statute might allow us to do that, but I can understand that as members of the public, we don't necessarily know that. And, you know, and to the extent that without violating confidentiality, we can go a little bit further in making that clear, we ought to do that.
I would like to add as well that it's our job to make that decision, and it takes the decision of the entire board to do so. So we haven't come to agreement to do that, and there's 7 of us sitting here with all different opinions about whether or not we should do that. So I think the way we're handling closed sessions is totally appropriate.
All right, other comments on the operating principles? Okay, then we will run down this one issue. We will bring this back for discussion next meeting with the rest of our board members. Go from there. All right, that moves us on to review of plans for Institute Day and the opening day of school.
Right. We have a lot of activities slated in the next few weeks. We have secretaries meetings coming up Friday with the teacher orientation beginning on Monday. And our big Institute Day is on Friday, August 19th, of which all board members have been invited. I've not heard any negatives. I assume everyone will be there. So we can introduce you to the teachers. No, I've not heard, so I
I
did not.
responded that I can.
Okay, so there are 2 of you, all right. And there'll be 3 of them, I'll be there. Okay. Okay. That will begin at 8 o'clock. The Elementary Learning Foundations will be hosting a coffee that morning. And we will be hearing from the ELF chair as well as the president of the PREA, and as well Mr. Heidi, our board president, and myself. And then we will culminate that morning's activity with a speaker. So we invite all those folks who can be there to certainly be there. And then students will begin school the following Monday according to the schedule we utilized in the past. So looking forward to getting school underway. We hope the weather cooperates with us. It stays kind of, and as it has been, not been extremely hot as it has been this summer. So we're certainly hoping for the best.
Any questions or comments?